There is a valley in New York, not far from the Hudson River, where the land seems perpetually draped in shadow. Locals call it Sleepy Hollow. Even in the brightest hours of the day, an unusual stillness lingers in the air, as if time itself hesitates to move forward. The forests are thick, their branches entwined like skeletal fingers reaching across the sky. Mist rolls over the meadows at dawn, and the wind carries with it whispers. Some say the voices of the past, unwilling to rest. Generations of farmers, hunters, and weary travelers have spoken of the valley's strange power. They say Sleepy Hollow casts a spell upon the mind, a dreamy enchantment that blurs the line between waking and nightmare. People forget the hour, lose their way, and sometimes vanish altogether. It is here, in this hushed valley, that one of America's most chilling legends was born. Years ago, a lanky, sharp-featured schoolteacher named Ichabod Crane came to Sleepy Hollow. He was not a man of great strength or bravery, but he was clever, ambitious, and endlessly curious. Ichabod made his living teaching the local children, though he often relied on the hospitality of farmers who let him lodge in their homes. By day, he was seen walking along the dirt roads, his long limbs moving like the awkward legs of a stork. He carried books, humming to himself with a voice so thin and nasal, it often startled birds from the trees. To some, he was a figure of ridicule. To others, a strange but harmless presence. But by night, Ichabod was different. The man had an insatiable appetite for tales of the supernatural. Whenever he gathered with neighbors, he would sit by the fire and listen intently to ghost stories, his eyes widening, his imagination running wild. Sleepy Hollow, with its haunted reputation, was a perfect place for such a mind. And though he would laugh at the stories in the daylight, when darkness fell, those same tales would tighten their grip upon his heart. The villagers of Sleepy Hollow were never short of stories. They spoke of ghostly apparitions that drifted through the fog, of voices calling from the marshes, and shadows moving just beyond the torchlight. But above all, one legend reigned supreme, the tale of the Headless Horseman. According to the elders, he was a soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. His body was buried in the churchyard, but his spirit could not rest. Each night, the horseman rode out, searching for his missing head, a grotesque phantom galloping through the hollow with terrifying speed. Some swore they had heard the pounding of hooves echoing through the valley at midnight. Though no horse could be seen, others claimed to have glimpsed him, cloaked in black, his severed neck glowing faintly in the moonlight, carrying a head tucked beneath his arm. The horseman, they said, never stopped until dawn, and if he encountered a traveler, he would chase them mercilessly, driving them from the hollow, or worse. One autumn evening, Ichabod joined a gathering at the home of a wealthy farmer, where neighbors shared food, cider, and stories. The night was filled with laughter, but when the fire burned low and the air grew still, the conversation turned to darker things. Old farmers leaned forward, their voices hushed, recounting their encounters with strange lights in the woods. Women clutched their shawls tighter as they spoke of spirits wandering the churchyard. But it was the tale of the Headless Horseman that held the room captive. One man described the pounding hooves he had heard one misty night, each step shaking the ground beneath him. Another swore he had seen a rider vanish at the edge of the cemetery gates. Ichabod listened, his eyes glittering with both fear and fascination. The story stirred his imagination, but they also planted seeds of dread. As the hour grew late and the guests prepared to leave, Ichabod could not shake the feeling that the shadows outside the window had grown darker, thicker, as though something was waiting. When Ichabod finally stepped out into the night, the valley was wrapped in silence. The moon was high, casting pale silver across the fields, and the air was unnervingly still. Every crunch of his boots on the path seemed too loud. The laughter of the gathering faded quickly behind him, swallowed by the vast quiet. As he walked, his mind replayed the stories he had just heard. He thought of the horseman's black cloak, the terrible emptiness where his head should be, the sound of galloping hooves in the mist. He tried to steady his nerves, reminding himself that they were just tales, nothing more. But Sleepy Hollow has a way of turning stories into something far more real. The branches overhead swayed, though no wind touched them. A chill ran through Ichabod's body. Somewhere behind him, he thought he heard a sound, a faint, distant thud, like hooves. He froze, straining his ears. Silence. Only silence. But in Sleepy Hollow, silence is never empty. It is a warning. And so began the night that would change Ichabod Crane's life forever. The road from the farmhouse to Ichabod Crane's lodging wound through forests and meadows, past marshes that exhaled a damp, earthy smell. The night was unusually quiet. Even the usual chirping of crickets had stilled, replaced by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Ichabod kept his pace brisk, clutching his lantern close to his chest. Its flame flickered nervously, casting long, spindly shadows across the path. Every tree seemed to bend toward him, every branch a claw reaching for his coat. He hummed softly, a trembling tune, hoping to drown out the thoughts that crawled into his mind. But the silence was heavy, as if the hollow itself were listening. The more he tried to ignore it, the louder it became. And then, there it was again. A dull sound, faint but distinct. The echo of hooves. Ichabod froze. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. He turned slowly, lifting the lantern, but the road behind him was empty. Only the mist stirred. "It's just my imagination," he whispered. Only the night. Only the night. But deep down, he knew Sleepy Hollow rarely played tricks without reason. The path soon led him to a small wooden bridge that stretched across a sluggish marsh. The water below reflected the moonlight, rippling with strange shapes that vanished when he tried to focus on them. Local superstition claimed that the bridge was a place where spirits lingered. They said no ghost could cross running water, but here in the hollow, even such old beliefs seemed uncertain. As Ichabod stepped onto the creaking boards, a sound of hooves rang out again, closer this time. He spun around, lantern shaking, but saw nothing, only the mist curling like smoke, the trees swaying though no wind touched them. He hurried across, his long legs carrying him awkwardly yet quickly to the other side. His mind raced with prayers and whispered reassurances, but every step echoed in his ears like a drumbeat. The road narrowed into a tunnel of trees, their branches knitting so tightly above that moonlight barely touched the ground. Ichabod's lantern was now his only light, bobbing as he walked faster, faster. Then he heard it, clear, undeniable. The thunder of hooves charging down the path behind him. His blood turned cold. He dared not look at first, terrified of what he might see. But the pounding grew louder, shaking the earth, and at last he turned. Through the mist, a dark figure emerged, a rider upon a massive black horse, cloaked in shadows. The figure loomed taller, darker, more menacing with every stride. But what froze Ichabod's soul was not the horse, not the cloak, but the emptiness where the rider's head should have been. On his saddle, cradled in one arm, was not a head of flesh and bone, but something pale and round, gleaming faintly in the lantern's glow. Some swore it was a skull. Others believed it was a burning jack-o'-lantern, a grotesque mask of death. Whatever it was not human. The Headless Horseman had come. Ichabod's first thought was to run. He stumbled forward, clutching the lantern, nearly dropping it in his panic. His long limbs carried him down the path, his breath ragged, his heart thundering louder than the hooves that pursued him. The horseman gave no cry, no warning. Only the sound of the gallop filled the night, closer and closer. The black steed tore through the mist like a shadow made flesh. Ichabod darted across another narrow bridge, hoping the old tale was true, that the spirit could not cross water. But when he dared a glance back, the rider was still there, unstoppable, gliding over the boards as though the rules of the living did not apply to him. Branches clawed at Ichabod's coat, tore at his sleeves, but he barely felt them. His world had narrowed to the pounding of hooves, the looming shadow behind him, and the terrible certainty that he was prey. At last, through the trees, Ichabod saw it, the outline of the old churchyard, its steeple rising like a finger pointing toward the heavens. His heart leapt. The story said that the horseman's power ended at the church grounds. If he could only reach the bridge that led to the gate, he would be safe. He gathered what little strength remained in his trembling body and sprinted. His lantern swung wildly, spilling light across the graves that lined the path. The pounding hooves were right behind him, each beat rattling his bones. As he reached the bridge, Ichabod threw himself forward, his chest burning, his breath tearing from his lungs. He dared not look back, dared not see how close the horseman was. He crossed the boards, stumbled to the other side, and collapsed onto the earth, gasping. For a moment, silence. And then the thunder of hooves stopped. Ichabod lifted his head, hope rising in his chest. The bridge, he thought, had saved him. The legend was true. But when he turned, lantern shaking in his hand, he saw the rider halt at the center of the bridge. Slowly, deliberately, the horseman raised the object in his arm. The head, or what looked like one, burned faintly in the night, its hollow eyes fixed on Ichabod. And then, with a motion swift and terrible, the horseman hurled it through the air. The object flew through the air with terrifying speed. Ichabod had only a heartbeat to react. He raised his arms in defense, but the lantern slipped from his grasp and shattered against the ground. Darkness swallowed the road. Something heavy struck him. A burst of pain, a blinding flash of light, then nothing. The night fell silent. Only the echo of hooves lingered in the distance, fading, until Sleepy Hollow was still once more. At dawn, the valley looked almost peaceful again. Sunlight touched the fields, the mist thinned, and the world seemed to have forgotten the terrors of the night. Farmers returned to their chores, children carried water, and smoke curled from chimneys as though nothing had changed. But when Ichabod Crane did not appear at the schoolhouse that morning, the whispers began. At first, neighbors assumed he had overslept, or perhaps gone to visit another farm. But by midday, concern grew. Children waited in vain, sitting on the steps, their slates untouched. By evening, a small search party gathered, lanterns in hand, to comb the roads he might have taken. They found no sign of Ichabod at the farmhouse where he had spent the previous evening. The host recalled his nervous departure, lantern in hand, walking briskly into the mist. From there, his trail seemed to vanish. The men searched the woods, calling his name. They crossed the bridge near the churchyard, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies, but there was no schoolmaster to be found. Only silence answered. And then someone spotted it. A broken lantern, its glass scattered across the road. Nearby lay Ichabod's hat, trampled into the dirt. And just beyond, resting in the grass, as though placed there on purpose, was a shattered pumpkin. The men exchanged uneasy glances. None dared to speak the thought aloud, but all knew the legend. By the next day, Sleepy Hollow was alive with speculation. Some claimed Ichabod had been taken by the Headless Horseman, carried off into the night, never to return. Others whispered that he had been struck by the phantom's fiery head and perished instantly, his soul claimed by the hollow. A few, less superstitious, suggested he had simply fled. They said Ichabod, humiliated and frightened, had left the valley altogether, perhaps to seek a safer, quieter life elsewhere. After all, the schoolmaster had little in the way of possessions and no strong ties. Disappearing would have been easy, but in the hollow, explanations rarely brought comfort. The people believed what they had always believed, that the valley held powers beyond reason, and that Ichabod Crane had fallen victim to them. Not everyone grieved the disappearance. Among the villagers was a broad-shouldered, mischievous man named Brom Bones. He was known for his rough humor, his booming laugh, and his fondness for pranks. Brom had long been a rival to Ichabod, both of them vying for the attention of a young woman named Katrina Van Tassel, the daughter of a prosperous farmer. It was no secret that Ichabod's sudden disappearance left Brom with fewer obstacles. When neighbors gathered to discuss the fate of the schoolmaster, Brom often laughed, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Once when the story of the pumpkin was mentioned, he chuckled and remarked that Ichabod must have been carried off by the horseman himself. Some thought Brom's laughter suspicious, too eager, too knowing. Could it be that the horseman was no phantom at all, but Brom in disguise, using the darkness and a pumpkin to terrify his rival? Perhaps Ichabod's flight had been nothing more than the result of a cruel joke gone too far. Yet, even those who suspected Brom dare not accuse him openly. Sleepy Hollow was a place where the boundary between prank and legend was dangerously thin. Days turned to weeks, and still Ichabod did not return. The schoolhouse grew quiet. Dust gathered on the slates. The desk remained empty, and children whispered to one another in the yard, glancing toward the woods as though expecting a figure to emerge at any moment. At night, villagers swore they still heard hooves pounding along the roads, though no rider was ever seen. Shadows moved across windows, and voices drifted through the trees. Sleepy Hollow seemed even more bewitched after Ichabod's vanishing, as though the valley had claimed him and was hungrier still. The legend of the Headless Horseman spread further, carried to nearby towns and whispered in hushed tones by travelers. The tale grew with each retelling. Sometimes, Ichabod was said to have been dragged into the graveyard by skeletal hands. Other times, that his body still rode the horseman's steed, a captive soul galloping through eternity. But one thing never changed: the pumpkin found at the scene. A mocking reminder, a symbol that blurred the line between man and ghost, prank and curse. In time, life in Sleepy Hollow continued, as it always did. Crops were planted, fires were lit, and families gathered around hearths. But the valley never let go of its hold on Ichabod's story. His fate remained a mystery, part tragedy, part warning. Some said that on certain misty nights, Near the bridge by the churchyard, a figure could be seen. Not the horseman, but a thin, stork-like man wandering the road, lantern in hand, forever searching for the way home. Others claimed that the horseman still rides, head tucked beneath his arm, his hollow eyes burning with hunger, chasing anyone foolish enough to linger too long after dark. Sleepy Hollow remembers. Sleepy Hollow never forgets. Years passed, and yet the story of Ichabod Crane remained fixed in the memory of Sleepy Hollow. The valley itself seemed determined to preserve the tale, weaving it into every whisper of wind and every ripple of mist. Autumn came each year with a strange unease. The trees turned crimson and gold, and pumpkins appeared in every field, their orange skins glowing like silent sentinels. Children, warned by their parents, would not wander alone after dusk. Travelers avoided the roads at night, no matter how urgent their journey. And still, the sound of phantom hooves was said to echo through the hollow. Some claimed to hear it on moonless nights, racing unseen through the fields. Others reported seeing a dark rider waiting at the edges of the forest, watching, motionless, before fading back into shadow. The legend was no longer just a story told by firelight. It was part of the land itself. One autumn evening, many years after Ichabod's disappearance, a traveler stopped at the inn near the Hudson River. He was weary, his boots caked in mud, his eyes carrying the weight of something he could not explain. As he warmed himself by the fire, the locals asked where he had come from. The man hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "I passed through the hollow," he said, "at night." The room fell still. No one traveled those roads after dark. He told them of a figure he had seen on the path, tall, awkward, carrying a lantern that glowed faintly in the mist. The man had tried to call out, but the figure never turned. It simply walked on, disappearing at the bend near the churchyard. The traveler swore that what he saw was not of this world. The locals only nodded, their faces pale. To them, the description was unmistakable. Ichabod Crane, still wandering, lost between the living and the dead. But there were other tales, darker ones. Hunters whispered of being followed in the woods by the pounding of hooves, though no rider was visible. Farmers spoke of finding deep hoofprints in the mud outside their barns, leading nowhere. And late at night, on the lonely road by the marsh, more than one villager claimed to have seen the Headless Horseman himself. Sometimes he rode silently, vanishing like smoke when approached. Other times, he carried his head, or what seemed to be one, high in the air, its hollow eyes glowing with a faint, hellish fire. And always he chased. Those who ran swore they barely escaped, collapsing at their doors with terror still clinging to them. Those who did not run were never seen again. Sleepy Hollow became known far and wide for its haunting. Travelers avoided it, yet the curious could not resist. Young men dared each other to ride the road at night, to pass by the churchyard and prove their courage. Most returned pale and trembling, swearing never to tempt the hollow again. And in the village itself, the story grew. Parents used it to quiet restless children, warning that the horsemen sought the disobedient. Lovers whispered it under the stars, their voices trembling as they swore they had heard the distant gallop. Storytellers carried it beyond New York, until Sleepy Hollow was no longer just a place, but a legend etched into the bones of America. Yet within the valley, the people did not need stories. They had the silence, the mist, and the unshakable sense that they were never truly alone. No one ever found the truth of what happened to Ichabod Crane. Some still insist he fled the hollow, humiliated and broken, too frightened ever to return. Others believe he was claimed by the horseman, his soul bound forever to the valley's curse. And there are those who whisper that he lingers still, caught between worlds, walking endlessly along the road with his lantern, forever searching for safety that never comes. What is certain is this: in Sleepy Hollow, the line between myth and reality is thinner than mist. And when the wind howls through the trees, when the ground shakes with the faint echo of hooves, every soul in the valley remembers. They remember the schoolmaster who vanished. They remember the pumpkin left behind. And they remember the headless horseman who rides still beneath the moon, hunting through the hollow. So if you ever find yourself traveling the dark roads of New York near the Hudson River, beware the silence that falls too suddenly. Beware the shadows that move without reason. And above all, if you hear the thunder of hooves behind you, do not look back, for in Sleepy Hollow, the legend never dies.